On today's episode, we'll be talking about hot staging testing, Starship construction progress, Starfactory expansion, the results of Booster 9 static fire, and much more. This is RGV Aerial Photography, Starbase Flyover Update, Episode 12. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Starbase Flyover Update. My name is Mauricio, and today we'll be flying over Starbase, Texas. I hope you enjoy this flight. We'll begin this week's tour of Starbase with a look at the Massey's testing site, where the star of the show this week is a hot staging test article. For a quick overview, here's a map layout of the area of interest at the Massey's test site, comparing the first flyover taken last week on Monday, July 31st. Now sliding over to the image taken 9 days later on Wednesday, August 9th to see what changed. Firstly, we begin this week's tour of Massey's at the Booster Cryogenic Testing Station, with significant additions being made since last week. This puck shucking stand is designed to have its thrust ramps push up against the thrust puck of the booster while it's pressurized with cryogenic fluid to simulate the thrust of the Center 13 Raptor engines. It will now also take on the role of being a transport stand as well. Seen here, we saw the addition of the 20 hold-down clamps for the booster to be used during transport this week. Also behind the booster cryo station, we can see what seems to be a new booster quick disconnect that will soon be installed onto the cryo station for future booster cryo testing. The addition of the BQD will decrease the time it takes to get the booster ready for cryo tests, as teams do not need to manually connect each pipe to the booster's QD panel. The ship puck shucker can be seen slightly downwards, notably with Ship 28 absent after its rollback to the Rocket Guardian on August 4th. S-28 previously underwent 2 cryogenic verification tests on this test stand. Moving on over to the right, we arrive at the miscellaneous staging area, which has now been coned off and is now mostly empty, a sign of future work at the site, perhaps for an unknown structure. Massey's definitely seems to be full of unknowns lately. Moving down, we see that the footings for the foundations of a building whose purpose is currently unknown at this time have been poured with concrete. Because of the large size of these footings, we expect the building that will be constructed on top of them is unusually heavy or tall. Have you got any ideas? Leave a comment down below and let us know what you think. Next up, we see the structural testing cage in 2 pieces located to the left. Once they are stacked together, we can expect them to be lifted onto the payload bed test article S24.2, as seen by this render courtesy of the space engineer. This particular test article, nicknamed the nose cone gel, is responsible for simulating not only flight loads by pulling from the top, but also the forces of re-entry by pulling these pistons surrounding the test article, mimicking forces coming from all sides. These include the sideway forces induced by drag as well as torsion or twisting forces. This rigorous testing is to ensure that the door of the Starlink PEZ dispenser will stay structurally stable not only during launch, but during re-entry as well. Contrary to popular belief, the door seen here does not play a role in the structural stability of the ship, with intense loads being placed on these stringers as well as extra reinforcements on the sides. Essentially, there would be a wide, thin hole stretching across almost the entire non-tiled section of the ship, so you can imagine the importance in testing the design before flight, which can occur as early as S-28. To the right of the structural test cage sits the can crusher, which is responsible for testing and exceeding flight loads during the initial launch phase of flight by pulling down on this so-called hat. Currently, it is being used to test a hot staging contraption consisting of Booster 11's old load head to simulate the top of the booster, the hot staging ring itself, and S-26.1 aft skirt to simulate the bottom ring of the ship. Additionally, extra stringers have been added to the outside of Ship 26.1 aft skirt and Booster 11's old load head. This to reinforce the section so only the hot stage ring experiences the above average flight loads. After all, you don't want your stand-in booster and ship sections to fail before your actual test article does. Moving past S-26.1 itself, whose career as a test article has likely ended, we see a tanker offloading liquid nitrogen or LN2 into the horizontal LN2 tanks completed a couple of months ago. This is the first time we've caught this happening. Concluding our tour Massey's, we note that 2 smaller horizontal tanks have shown up. These are probably to increase cryogenic storage capacity, although it won't be by much. And that's it for Massey's. Time to fly northeast to our next stop, Sanchez. Next up is Sanchez, comparing the first flyover taken last week on Monday, July 31st. Now sliding over to the second photo taken on Wednesday, August 9th. It seems like SpaceX has completed work on the framework for the new ground fabrication building, After the installation of roofing panels, SpaceX will use this building for production of various ground assemblies, stands, and jigs. Moving east to where SpaceX has been working on 3 mysterious ring structures. One is already welded together, a second one is about to be welded together, and parts of a third one have begun to be laid out. We are unsure what the purpose of these structures is at this point in time. As always, if you have any idea what this could be, let us know it down in the comment section. Additionally, what seems to be a load spreader is being worked on right next to it. Up in the area that was used to construct the Mega Bay 2 sections, SpaceX finished up their work and started clearing that area up. Currently, SN15's aft section is sitting here. SN15 was the first ever Starship to successfully complete a flight test. It is unknown currently what will happen to SN15's aft section. Moving over to the far end of Sanchez site into the Rocket Garden, Ship 25, the ship next expected to fly, has been moved back from the launch complex for final work before flight. Right next to it, an additional water tank has been installed. In the meantime, Ship 28 was lifted onto the engine installation stand to receive its 6 Raptors prior to a test campaign and a possible flight. And for those of you wondering, the remaining ships and boosters are Booster 11, Booster 10, Booster 4, Ship 26, and Ship 20. Further south, SpaceX installed a ring onto a concrete foundation. We believe this will become some kind of supply tank, likely a water tank in the future. Backing up our speculation is this picture taken by Greg Scott over at the Kennedy Space Center of the water tanks at that location, which looks quite similar to the tank being constructed here. Finally, SpaceX has been busy cleaning up the incoming area in front of the inventory tent. And with that, off to the build site. Now moving right to the build site. Feel free to zoom in and explore this labeled map of various production facilities at this site, and thanks to Procky for creating this. Here we have a shot comparing the first flyover of the build site from July 31st. Now sliding over to show another few seconds of the photo from August 9th to compare the changes. Starting off at the very top of this top-down shot, we notice that the third and fourth sections of the Mega Bay 2 have been lifted this past week, completing the assembly of level 5, which is the last pre-assembled level. What's left for Mega Bay 2? We can expect the remaining white steel at Sanchez as well as this piece, circled here, to be lifted on top of level 5 to create the roof. Before that happens, 2 bridge cranes are expected to arrive at the build site where they'll be lifted into the bay before the roof is covered up. The first of 2 bridge cranes was sighted in front of the Starbase sign on August 11th. Rotating to this angled shot, we get a better view of the previously mentioned roof segment and the build site LR11000 crane, which has been laid down ahead of reconfiguration to extend its boom, ahead of lifting the roof segments onto level 5. The additional lifting jig segments can be seen staged over here. Above the crane we see the stair sections were staged closer to Mega Bay 2 ahead of lifting. Now let's take a peek into Mega Bay 1, currently home to the 2 halves of Booster 12, as well as Booster 9 after it was rolled back from the launch site on the evening of Tuesday, August 7th and the morning of the 8th. It's likely B9's rollback is in preparation for its next static fire, or even for launch, depending on whether or not SpaceX decides to repeat a 33-engine firing for better results. We might even expect a new hotstaging ring to be installed on the top of B9, but when we'll see this happen hinges on the results of the Hotstaging's article's can crusher test. Oh, and by the way, this isn't entirely a real image, thanks to the space engineer for somehow managing to overlay the Hotstaging ring onto this ground shot I took last week to help visualize what it will look like once installed on Booster 9. Now sliding over to the left, we see High Bay 1 home to Ship 29 and Ship 30. It's noteworthy to mention that Ship 29 hiding in the right corner has strangely not been visibly worked on in quite a while, as it's still missing its tiles and aft flaps. What does the future hold for Ship 29? Ship 30 sits right next to 29 with its nose cone, payload bay, and common dome already stacked, and awaiting stacking onto its mid-lock section. That stacking happened later on the day of the flyover of August 9th, thereby making Ship 30 5 out of 6 sections tall. Thanks to Lab Padre for providing this footage and to Vicky for capturing this time-lapse. All that's left now is to install the CH4 downcomer and aft section to complete the stacking of Ship 30. Wrapping up the last of the bays, we have the mid-bay. The only noticeable change this week is that the payload bay test article S24.2 has been disconnected from the crane, a good sign that its rollout to the structural test cage at Massey's is coming up soon. Before moving on to the Starfactory, let's go over some of the changes at the ring yard real quick. The left side of the ring yard was cleared to allow additional crane extension parts. Where did they go? Some of them were squeezed over here, in between tent 2 and tent 3. We can also see Ship 27's aft section was moved from the inside tent 1 to outside tent 3, following S-27's implosion and scrapping. The aft had some parts such as the QD port and other external plumbing removed while it was in tent 1, possibly for recycling. Over at the flap storage area, we noticed that the 2 flaps that were being stored last flyover have been moved, likely into the tent for tiling work before being installed on S-29. Also, 2 new forward flaps have appeared in its place, which were likely moved out of the tent as one of them is already partially tiled. Now moving on to the Starfactory. Let's see how it looked like last week. And this is how it looked like this week. Let's go over these changes in detail. First off, we noticed what could possibly be a new liquid argon tank next to an already constructed segment which will be used for welding if it is actually argon. Sliding to the right, we notice that the area between the already constructed portion and the one currently under construction has been cleared of various materials and trucks and has been replaced by these pieces of roofing framework. Better seen in this photo taken by Starbase Surfer, we can expect the gap between these 2 buildings to be fully connected on Phase 2 expansion of the Starfactory nears completion. Meanwhile, the top and middle parts of the Starfactory have almost had roofing framework completely installed, and we can expect roofing panels to start being installed in the middle section in the following week or 2. Moving down, we see what might just be the last vapor barrier, indicating a concrete pour going on. After this, the entire base of the Starfactory expansion will have had a concrete pile cap poured on it, with the only question mark remaining being this piece of land to the right that SpaceX currently does not own. Meanwhile, at the construction site closest to Highway 4, more steel has been staged beside this area, indicating this area is almost ready for the assembly and erection of vertical and horizontal steel beams, which interestingly seems to be a different color than the other sections above. Last but not least, the tracking dishes used for tracking Starship launches have been uninstalled. Why is this? Leave your speculation in the comment section down below. And that wraps up the build site. Before moving on to the much anticipated launch site, be sure to leave a thumbs up if you learned something new from this video so that it can reach a larger audience. Thank you. Here's a quick look at the overall layout of the launch site using this labeled map. The launch site is at the far end of Highway 4 where it meets the Gulf of Mexico. Here we have a shot comparing the first flyover of the launch site from July 31st. Now sliding over to show another few seconds of the photo from August 9th to compare the changes. We'll get started at the launch site by taking a look at the suborbital pads. Most notably, we see S-25 has finally been removed from Pad B. The ship was removed on August 5th, with its lifting hooks immediately removed and transported to a rocket garden overnight on the 6th, where it now rests on the stand formerly occupied by SN-15. The remainder of the engine shielding and TPS work will likely be performed at this location before eventual rollback for the full stack testing and launch. Other than appearing a little less cluttered than before, suborbital pad A looks relatively unchanged. At the bottom near edge of the pad, we can see the booster engine maintenance platform on standby. If we take a look at the main entrance to the launch site from the north side of Highway 4, we see what appears to be a much cleaner site in general. The former suborbital landing pad appears to have less equipment and random tooling lying around. A lot of this was done in preparation for a static fire Booster 9 on August 6. More on that later, but it's also a step in the right direction in preparation for the next integrated flight test as well. When we zoom in and look at the orbital tank farm expansion area, we can see quite a bit of progress has been made since the last flyover. The formwork previously created for the first concrete piers on the left have been removed since concrete has now been poured. We can see the remainder of the slab on the top and bottom has now been poured as well, with additional rebar and formwork going up for the remainder of the piers. If we take a look at the line of piers that have been poured thus far, it appears there is an offset of the embeds for the tank mounts. This could indicate different sized tanks will be used. If we use the existing tanks containing liquid methane as reference, it appears there may be space for up to 9 additional hot dog tanks altogether. What do you think they'll store in these? Moving east over to the orbital tank farm, not a whole lot has changed. The most noticeable difference since last week is the 4th LOX pump installed over the LOX processing site. This was in progress at the time of the last flyover, but we can now see the pump is in place with the motor attached. The pump is currently not hooked up to the lock supply line, and it remains to be seen if this will be done prior to the next launch attempt. An additional pump could help alleviate some of the strain placed on the 3 existing pumps, allowing less load to be evenly spread across all 4 pumps. Looking back over to the methane side of the farm, we can see the newest hot dog tank installed several weeks back remains unhooked from the rest of the tanks. It seems apparent this isn't urgently needed for the current tanking operations. Let's take a look over at the water storage farm on the south side of the site, where water and high-pressure gas feeds to the steel flame deflector plate under the LLam. It appears most of the scaffolding that previously surrounded the tanks has now been removed. The only scaffolding that remains is down below the newest high-pressure tanks. In the center of the image, we can see the boom of the LR11000 crane owned by SpaceX looming above the area where the third and final large water storage tank will be placed. The crane was moved over to this location in anticipation of the arrival of the tank, which finally occurred after this flyover on the evening of August 9th. The VersaBar load spreader used during the previous tank lift was spotted waiting nearby to assist with the lift of the new tank. The tank would finally be lifted and placed onto its cradles on August 10th. All that remains is fitting of the water supply and discharge piping, as well as a high-pressure gas supply to tie it in with the others for future use. This should add additional capacity to the setup, prolonging the length of the time that the system can be active during a static fire or launch. Just above the high-pressure gas tanks and associated valve banks, we can see what appears to be the new manifolds that will tie the newest 3 stacks of high-pressure tanks together to feed the main high-pressure line in conjunction with the 2 original stacks. Over on the right-hand side of the water storage farm, we can see more concrete has been poured to further expand the slab and cover exposed dirt. In the lower left of the image, we can see a concrete truck actively pouring a fresh layer just behind where the new large storage tank will be located. A few small areas can be seen prepared with rebar for pouring near the main discharge pipes. It's possible these areas were poured following the conclusion of our flyover. As we approach the conclusion of today's video, we head over to the highly anticipated orbital launch pad. Over on the left-hand side of the image, we see a partially filled water retention pond with the remnants of a recent flame deflector plate testing and static fire test. Trucks from a local service company, Movac, has been spotted removing water from the pond for proper disposal of the water. This same company has also been spotted entering the launch site prior to testing, presumably delivering fresh water to the flame deflector storage tanks. Moving up towards the launch tower just behind the chopsticks, we can see more staircase pieces waiting to be lifted onto the stack behind the tower. Just to the right where the former booster crowd station was located, we can see what appears to be further disassembly of the former stand. With the new booster and ship testing pads at Massey's, it's likely SpaceX no longer needs these crowd pads and will take advantage of the extra space once they're gone. We expect disassembly of the adjacent ship crowd station to begin soon. If we move back over and look closely on the south side of the orbital launch mount at the Fondag, we see what appears to be multicolored paint markings on the surface. Is this a sign of cracking following the Booster 9 static fire? It's possible, but it's also possible these were cracks that formed during the curing process not long after the Fondag was poured and prior to the recent static fire. It's not clear why SpaceX has painted these locations, but it's possible they want to track the cracks in the coming days or weeks, or possibly after future tests, to see if the cracks continue to propagate across the surface. Perhaps they're just marking areas to identify where fixes are needed. Over on the north side of the LLam, we see no evidence of these markings that would indicate cracking issues. This further supports the theory that the cracks were not a direct result of the static fire. Up on top of the LLam, we see much awaited paintwork finally occurring on the only remaining carbon steel surrounding the perimeter of the mount. The rest of the shielding on top of the LLam has been converted to stainless, causing a small ring of carbon steel to stick out like a sore thumb if left unprotected. We can also see some scaffolding has returned on both sides to the BQD for reasons unknown. Finally, when we take a closer look at the east-facing staircase of the LLam in front of the yellow crane, we can see additional shielding work has resumed to carry the shielding even higher up the sides. The shielding on the left side of the staircase is now approximately the same height as the shielding on the crowd pipe leg just to the left. More shielding can be seen on the right side of the pad for future install on the right side of the staircase. A canopy will need to be constructed to cover up the top of the staircase to protect it from the next launch, but let's hope the next liftoff doesn't involve a power slide to that side of the mount. Now, about that static fire we mentioned earlier. SpaceX performed a successful spin prime on August 4th in preparation for a highly anticipated static fire test. The last static fire performed on the LLam was 6 months ago when Booster 7 performed a 31-engine static fire on February 9th. After being hoisted onto the launch mount exactly 3 months to the day since IFT-1 back in July, Booster 9's engines came to life finally on Sunday, August 6. This was a huge moment and a chance for engineers to see their solution to prevent future pad destruction was going to be a success, or if they would have to revisit the drawing boards. Comparing the photos from this static fire to the previous static fire of B7, I think we can say the flame deflector plate has proven to be a success so far. Minimal charring is visible on the previously painted orbital launch mount legs, nor on the plate or surrounding pad surface. Before implementation of the deflector plate, significant burn damage could be seen on the legs of the orbital launch mount and surrounding concrete, with small craters created as a result from the high temperature and pressure of B7's 31 Raptor engines. Despite the grand performance of the new plate, the static fire wasn't a 100% success. Unfortunately, according to the SpaceX flight director during the event, 4 engines shut down prematurely during the test, resulting in an abort at just 2.74 seconds into the planned 5-second firing. While this wasn't the result many were hoping for, especially after B7 successfully static fired 31 engines out of the 33, it's too early to say what caused the engines to be shut down and whether we should call into question the reliability of the Raptor 2 engine or some other system. We would have anticipated SpaceX replacing any troublesome engines while the booster remained on the LLam, where engine work is the easiest to perform, but this wasn't the case. Is this an indication that they may not be a major issue with the engines themselves? Will they perform another static fire to try and get all 33 engines to go to the desired duration? Tell us what you think in the comment section down below. The plate survived a static fire at what we assume to be a 50% throttle, but can it survive the throttle up on launch day? I'm ready to find out and hope you are too. And that's it for Starbase Flyover Update episode 12. Thank you for choosing to fly with RGV aerial photography. If you like what you saw today, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the new videos each week. And also leave a thumbs up. Also, please consider supporting our flyovers through Patreon to gain access to our flyover gallery the same day it occurs. Finally, join our public Discord server to discuss Starship and space in general with like-minded fans around the world. Link is in the description down below. This is Mauricio and that's all for now.